first acknowledge the fact that other languages might be represented, but will not be interpreted in this call. We are your language justice team because Homes for All believes that everybody has the right to express themselves in the language in which they are most comfortable and to be understood in a multilingual space in which no language is dominant over another language. Because Spanish is a gendered language, we will be using an X where an O or an A would typically be used. Thank you. Oh, and please help us by speaking slowly and clearly and one at a time.
Thank you so much. And now I'm going to turn it over to Malcolm with Homes for All and Right to the City with some tech tips.
Oh, and Margot and Vero, did you want to make the announcement in Spanish too?
Yes, that would be great. City, derecho a la ciudad, cree en la justicia del lenguaje, que todo el mundo debe recibir la información en el lenguaje en que se siente más cómodo. Por favor, marque la línea del español para escuchar esta reunión en español. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Margot y Vero. Thank you. So a couple things quickly on tech tips for folks. If you are calling and need the Spanish language interpretation, the phone number is 408-638-0968.
Se está llamando la línea español en
inglés. 4989-000-905. Si necesitas interpretación en español, el número de la línea para hispanohablantes es 408-638-0968 y el código es 989-000-9035. So we'll put that on the screen in just a second. And then we're going to be keeping most folks on mute so that we can really hear our panelists today. We want to encourage folks to use the speaker view if you're using Zoom. That will allow you to see the people who are speaking. So if you want to click in the top right of your Zoom screen, next to the full screen button, there's a button that says speaker view. And you can click on speaker view, and that will make sure that whoever is speaking and unmuted will come up on your screen. And then as you all are participating later on during the Q&A, you can use *6 to be able to unmute your phone. So again, that's *6. And then lastly, throughout the call, we want to encourage folks to use the chat box. And we're going to encourage folks to ask questions or provide comments in the chat box. And to access the chat box, if you look at your Zoom menu, which should be at the bottom of your screen, there is a little chat bubble with 3 dots in it. There's the word chat underneath it. And you can click on chat, and that will open up your chat box, which you can use to ask questions and share comments or share links. I think that's it for the tech reminders. If there's any other tech questions that folks have, you are welcome to chat me. I am the Homes for All account in the using the chat box. I'm going to turn it back over to Amy.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. And again, as a reminder to please mute yourself if you're not speaking, so we reduce the amount of background noise and we can hear speakers clearly. All right, so to start us off with who is Homes for All and why are we hosting this meeting on Zoom today? Basically, I am, first off, I am Amy Inglis with Tenants Together over in California. And we are also a part of Homes for All out here, as well as the folks who are going to be presenters today and over in New York about their victory. And we are a national campaign uniting renters and residents facing displacement in cities across the country to fight for and win renters' rights and community control of land and housing. Been doing this since 2013, and many member organizations have been doing this for even longer before that, and recognize the need to come together at a national stage and push forward change and a narrative around things like racism always shaping housing and land policies in the US. And being led by communities of color and working class communities that are the hardest hit. We currently have 80 member organizations in 46 cities in 24 states and are growing every day. You can find more information about us at homesforall.org. And then also a lot of the work I do day to day at Tenants Together is connected nationally through the Renters' Rights Translocal Track, which entails fighting explicitly for renters' rights ordinances, kind of like the ones that were passed in New York recently, and contracts with individual landlords, negotiations, that kind of thing, with the goal of organizing mass numbers of renters into a long-term fight for housing justice. But we're facing immediate needs to keep the rents from rising in short and midterm campaigns. But we need to coordinate and we need to strengthen our movement. That's what this track is for. And so it's really great to be moderating this discussion today and be in community with folks from New York and other places around the country. Because I know from our perspective here in California, we were certainly super jealous about your win. And we're like, oh my God, how did they do it? How can we do it here? Because the fights that we're currently having are a lot more moderate, and we got to keep pushing. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this off to 4 incredible organizers and leaders from New York State's Upstate and Downstate Coalition, and they're here to share some of the local and statewide lessons and challenges about this monumental victory. And just to note, this was broad coalition work, not necessarily all groups were part of Homes for All, so we don't want to, make the mistake of saying that we're like just entirely responsible. It was really a coalition effort, and there was leadership from different organizations and different networks as well. But here we are. And first off, I believe I'm going to pass it to Andrea Shapiro to talk about the timeline and brief history of the struggle. So go ahead, Andrea, take it away. Oh, you guys are muted. Unmute.
Thank you for that. Hi, I'm Andrea. I'm with the Council on Housing, and we are part of Homes for All. Hi, I'm Sia. I'm the campaign coordinator for the Housing Justice for All campaign, which is a campaign that Upstate Downstate Housing Alliance did to strengthen and expand renters' rights. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to do this today.
Hi, I'm Anita Long again, and I'm with CASA in the Bronx, part of the Housing Justice for All campaign.
And hi, my name is Lena Melendez, and I'm with the Riverside Edgecombe Neighborhood Association.
So before we kick off to the timeline, I just wanted to share a little bit of context and politics for the Housing Justice for All campaign, and we're going to dive in and do some more work on this during the rest of the session today. But one of the expressions that people often say is that, in New York, real estate money is like oil in Texas. And so I think that one of the things that we did throughout this campaign is that we took on the most powerful real estate industry in the state using a combination of tenant organizing on the ground, and all sorts of other different kinds of tactics to really sort of drive the most powerful industry out of New York State politics. That took a lot out of everybody, and so we are thrilled to have built the largest upstate and downstate homeless New Yorkers and renter network of people fighting for true housing justice in the state, and we are really just at the beginning. So as much as this was a real victory and we are so thrilled about what we won, we still have so much left to do and a lot to learn from everyone who is on the call as well to make sure that we can do it better and stronger than ever before. So we hope that this is really the sort of start of an ongoing partnership of national organizing for renters' rights, and we're really happy to be here today.
And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the timeline. So New York's had some form of renters protection since World War II, and the fight we were currently in and that we had some major victories in had started actually in 1974. So this is no way an overnight success. Every few years the rent laws expire. It's usually every 4 years, so it's an odd year where there's not an election going on. And so this has been going on since the 70s. In the 90s we had major losses, which is why we had so much that was desperate for us to win this year. And the last rent law fight that we all of our groups participated in was in 2015, where even though we had a Democratic governor, at a Democratic assembly, we did not have a Democratic state senate, which is how the government of New York works. And so we took sort of a lot of our lessons of sort of just getting what we needed done in 2015 together. That it was really important that we worked together, and we started the campaign almost immediately after 2015. We started with sort of a smaller campaign with some diverse coalitions working on 3 bills that we worked on as a group. And there were sort of the 3 major ways that the rents were increased, and started to do some town halls, as well as we had a smaller fight around a tax incentive that we lost to Governor Cuomo. And so it really gave us a lot of energy to fight back and work harder to get what we needed this year. We started doing things like canvassing in strategic districts, which Lena's going to talk about. We did something called Homoville, where we slept out in front of the governor's office in Midtown for 3 days, doing a lot of actions there. I know people are having problems hearing me, and we're gonna try and work maybe on that. Sorry.
Yeah, Andrea, we're getting some folks saying that it's a little choppy. I'm actually wondering if you all can just call in on the English line and keep your video on, just to be able to have the audio on the phone. Sorry to interrupt. I didn't mean to.
That's okay.
Yeah, 1 sec. We're gonna try and do that from Anita's phone. So we'll keep going and we'll try and figure out the tech. 1 second.
Okay. And I'll just move much closer to the
So
phone.
we're trying to kind of unmute our video right now as to see it.
Hi. All right, so Sia and Anita are working on the phone while I'm going to try and continue going.
Great.
So we don't waste time. And so one of the things that we were doing is we were really sort of focusing on who our targets would be and changing who our targets were to keep up with what was happening in New York, as well as doing a lot of outreach, doing a lot of canvassing, a lot of flyering, town halls. This was all in 2017. So this was, we had 2 years out. It felt like the rent laws were going to expire a long time from now. And then we came together to form this upstate downstate housing justice for all coalition, which name I just got wrong, in October of 2017 is when we really started to work together as a group. And we started off with a church rally and doing civil disobedience at the State of the State. which is a speech the governor does in New York every year as sort of a way of announcing our presence, that we were a new force and that we weren't going to be quiet. From there, we had a lot of little things that we were able to do along the way. So there's a city council vote on the rent laws, which is sort of a way that they can reaffirm our bills. And we start to do our lobbying these, almost 2 years in advance, and got some city leaders on board. So the speaker of the city council in New York, Corey Johnson, we got him to do some rallies with us. We got some other city council members to work with us. And then June of 2018 was our big launching off point, where we did a rally with 1,000 people in Manhattan. We marched downtown, we closed Park Avenue, and we were actually able to confront the governor, who was getting an award.
I'm now on a phone, so hopefully. Oh. 1 second, sorry. Okay. Hopefully now our technology is a little better. So on June 15th, a year before the rent law expired, we did this huge action. We were able to walk past the governor, booing at him, letting him know that it was his housing crisis. After that, we started to do some more retreats and really focus on the electoral work that needed to be done in New York for the primaries that were happening and getting ready. And we were able to change the face of New York State Senate during the primary, which is really important.
Okay, hopefully the sound is better. And then doing some canvassing. Almost every week we had a canvass, which we'll talk about sort of throughout the year before. And we had elected officials sign pledges. And sort of every quarter we tried to do one really big action where we could show our turnout of 1,000 people, including marching in the snow. And then we started doing something we called Tenant Tuesday as soon as the legislative season started this year, where we had people in Albany nearly every Tuesday, and we had a very large Twitter presence because that's where a lot of the New York State electoral politics happens. In New York State, there's a budget where nothing much happens before then. So while we were having a presence in Albany, making sure people knew about that, as soon as the budget season was over, we had a huge march and rally in the church with thousands of people to sort of give people a notice. And then we gave the state a 30-day notice after doing a lot of lobbying in between, culminating with sort of this huge civil disobedience in the Capitol. We tried to get 100 people arrested. They met their quota at 60 and then refused to arrest the rest of us. And then we were finally able, all the canvassing we had done for the last 2 years, we were finally able to deliver those petitions, which really in the end made it a big difference that we had been planning for so long for this. And then sort of the last week was a blur of activity of a deal being announced, and us not giving up the pressure during that moment. That even once a deal had been announced, we did multiple rallies at the governor's office, at some of our targets' offices, to make sure that they knew that they couldn't get out of this. Culminating with our bills being signed on June 14th, which was really exciting.
Cool. So I think throughout that, the sort of major lessons that we want to pull out of that, and Liz is going to talk a little bit this as well, is that we decided that we wanted to go on the offensive. And instead of just protecting the sort of rent stabilization that we have in New York City, that wasn't good enough anymore. And we wanted to unite tenants across the entire state. So this campaign was really rooted in fighting for new rights for people who are currently unregulated renters and demanding the impossible, and not letting us take on like a tenant movement fight that that really is just like about protecting what we currently had. I think the sort of second lesson is that, you know, this was a timeline that started in 2015, but many of the things that we're fighting for are grounded in sort of really centuries of tenant organizing in New York City, and centuries of tenants confronting real estate power in New York City. And so we started from a place that was sort of like grounded in a tenant movement that has been building since, you know, like the 1970s. And a labor movement in the city of New York that has been also sort of struggling to sort of organize for housing justice for a long time as well. So that was certainly a strength that we had, that we were able to like piece together different parts of a movement building into the 2019 legislative session. And so I think now we're going to hear from Liz, who sadly is not with us in the room in New York City because she is up in Rochester. So whoever is running the tech, I think, can we hand it over to Liz?
Yeah, so Liz, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. And just a reminder, Liz is from the Citywide Tenant Union of Rochester. So take it away, lessons from building the movement.
Thank you. My name is Elizabeth McGriff, and I'm a member of the Citywide Tenants Union. And I'm one of the co-founders of the Upstate Downstate Alliance and a member of the Homes for All movement. Our state assembly was kind of the glue that started the movement. The first assembly was in October 2017 in Albany, New York. And what it did was bring a lot of tenant groups and activists from across the state together. What it did was it built relationships and trust from tenants across the state. It allowed for a deeper understanding of the differences and the issues of different regions through storytelling. New York State tenants learned just how bad conditions were and how few tenants protections were in upstate New York. And upstate learned about New York City and its struggle and the reforms those tenants have been fighting for years. From local organizing and base building to statewide organizing. The Citywide Tenant Union has been organizing tenants in distressed buildings by empowering tenants to know and enforce their rights, to build their power through organizing around their concerns. This helped build the connection, you know, for folks that they could, so that they could see how their local issues kind of weaved into the statewide struggle. Many tenants protections could not pass, most of the tenant protections could not pass locally. A lot of them, they had to go to a legislative level, to the state level, in order to get a lot of them passed. For example, the good cause, eviction protection, and rent stabilization. So, so we needed that uniting of all the state in order to get those bills passed. And building a strategy from the ground up to the assembly. What it did was we created a statewide demand, which kind of encompassed all the issues throughout the state. We also mapped out a strategy, and within that strategy, we built an understanding of who was with us, who was against us in the legislative, as far as the legislators, and in the real estate lobby. We also how did And then we put pressure on our key folks that we picked out in 2018 and set up electoral battle for the next coming year for universal rent control to make a greater gains in 2019. In September, in September of 2018, the Assembly, we assembled in Rochester a major strategy discussion that targeted, our plan, and we planned out our targets, and we set up Tenant Tuesdays throughout in February. Tenant Tuesdays where we would go and talk to our legislators and Assembly folks to push our issues and our concerns. A statewide Assembly and actions. We did actions in New York City, Albany, tons of actions like that was said earlier in different places such as Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, in New York City. Some actions in assemblies, we boxed Como in, like Celia said earlier, and we took over Park Avenue. We marched in a snowstorm through Wall Street, so that was very exciting. We started organizing tenants where their concerns were and built media attention around it. We gained community support, and we built on a local level, and it kind of transitioned into the statewide level, bringing in other folks like from Syracuse, Akron, Buffalo, Westchester County, from all over the place. And that ends mine.
Thank you so much, Liz. It's so inspiring to hear about different organizations in different cities showing up for each other in solidarity for their fights. That's really cool. And also inspiring, and folks talking about the timeline and history of going and actually having a goal of getting 100 people arrested. And I think like that kind of escalation of tactics is what we need. So great work. I'm gonna go ahead and pass it back to Sia.
Can I say one more thing before?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Liz.
One of the other things that we did was, it was really historical for the Rochester area because we've never had, the Assembly have a hearing in our area. It's usually when they do have those hearings, it's usually in Albany. And so it was good for some of our folks to kind of see the process and to kind of speak at that assembly and share their stories, which brought some of our assembly, men to their tears, to hear people's stories. So it was very impactful.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz. So next up is Sia Weaver with Upstate Downstate Coalition, talking about lessons from the electoral strategy.
Hey, everybody. So I want to sort of just talk a little bit about one of the key factors that helped us win, which is that we were able to join a longstanding and powerful sort of tenants and housing rights movement with a new insurgent sort of left electoral movement in New York. Coming off of 2016, as everybody knows, we unfortunately elected a New York City landlord to be president of the US. And that sort of inspired a lot of new activism. I think really it inspired new activism across the country, but it also inspired some new activism in New York specifically, where there's a long history of, I won't say his name, but he's a New York City landlord who has exploited renters for decades in New York. And he has paid money to our politicians in New York to get favors when it comes to real estate development in our city and in our state. And so that sort of background inspired like a whole new wave of people who hadn't necessarily been politically active in the renter movement before to start paying attention to what New York state tenants are demanding. And so we were able to join a host of new political activists who were like, no more Republicans in power, no more 45 or whatever you want to call him. And they were able to join with us in this like sort of tenant movement that had been building for many, many decades. And so the key thing that I think we did here is that, you know, from 2016 on, we basically started like pushing out like a referendum on the role that real estate developers play in New York politics. And we said repeatedly, no more real estate money to elected officials. You can't stand with tenants and stand with landlords. There are no two sides. There is either the side of renters or the side of real estate, and whose side are you really going to be on? And we pushed that narrative and we made that demand to elected officials throughout the campaign. And I think sort of like early on, people sort of tried to equivocate and they were like, well, you know, like not all landlords. And we were like, okay, but you know, landlords exploit these loopholes to push people out of their homes. They use major capital improvements specifically. Trump uses major capital improvements specifically to defraud people. And so if you are on the side of real estate, you cannot be on the side of tenants. And we started saying that in around 2016, really around Governor Cuomo. From 2016 to late 2018, Cuomo was running for re-election, and we put out a demand during Cuomo's election that gubernatorial candidates endorse our demands for universal rent control. For us, universal rent control really meant two main things. The first thing it meant was closing all the loopholes in rent stabilization in New York City and the surrounding counties that were driving people out of their homes. It meant that we would eliminate MCIs, we would eliminate vacancy decontrol, we would eliminate IAIs, preferential rents, and all the things that all the sort of weakening measures landlords had been putting into rent stabilization, thanks to Cuomo, since the sort of 1980s and 1990s. So we called on gubernatorial candidates and statewide candidates to endorse our plan for renters' rights, which was closing those loopholes, expanding the protections to cover the whole state, not just New York City, and expanding them to, and expanding them to cover renters in buildings with less than 6 apartments. In New York, rent stabilization only applies to apartment buildings with more than 6 units. And you know, we really said, if you rent, you should have the same basic protections no matter what kind of building you live. If it's a manufactured home community, if it's an apartment building in Rochester, a single family home, or a big building in New York City, you should have the same basic rights. So throughout 2017 and 2018, we were making that demand to candidates for statewide office, demanding that they endorse this sort of platform. And then we were also making that demand to candidates who were running for local office, for state assembly or the state senate. What that meant going into our legislative session in 2019 is that, sorry, we also asked that they refuse to take real estate money to fund their elections. So we had at least 4 candidates for office in the 2018 elections refuse to take real estate money to fund their donations, which was a sort of phenomenal victory. And then by November 2018, the sort of major fundraiser for the Democratic Party in the state of New York had also refused to take real estate money to fund their elections as well. So that sort of demand to get real estate out of politics really made it from the sort of like left to the center, and to like from a sort of thing that only tenant movement activists were demanding to something that the sort of mainstream progressives were embracing relatively quickly. And so then what happened when we started legislative session in 2019 is, unfortunately, Cuomo, our real estate governor, won re-election, but we had elected a number of state senators and a couple assembly members who were going into office not as Democrats, but as elected officials with a mandate to tackle the housing crisis, which I think is different, because I don't want to just say, like, we elected Democrats and therefore we won. It's not necessarily true. They didn't hold solitary confinement in New York State. They didn't legalize marijuana in New York State. These are like basic progressive things that could really lead to decarcerating New York. But we did elect Democrats who were willing to take on the role of the real estate industry in politics, and that was a critical narrative for our fight. So that's all that I have, and I want to kick it over to Lena, who is going to talk a little bit about the role of local tenant organizing in building this coalition.
Okay. Hi, my name is Lena Melendez. I'm a member of RENA, and RENA stands for Riverside Edgecombe Neighborhood Association. It's a nonprofit organization that fights for tenants' rights and that helps tenants that have problems with their landlords. They're an affiliate of the Metropolitan Council of Housing, and they're part of Home, and Met Council is part of Homes for All. So RENA is, I, like many tenants, was pulled into the rent laws fight through my own personal struggle. A lifetime resident of Washington Heights, in 2016, my mom passed away, and my landlord did not want to acknowledge my succession rights. And for 9 months, he didn't cash my rent checks. RENA and a nonprofit law group helped me to form a tenant association in my building. And landlords don't like tenant associations because tenants can come together in a group housing part action and require through a court that they do repairs, which is exactly what we did. During that court battle that lasted 2 years, I began to attend meetings with other tenant rights groups. And one such group was the Northern Manhattan is Not for Sale group that was uptown in Inwood. They're like just one zip code north of me. There were many, many meetings to strategize how to get the community involved and get the community's voice heard. At every meeting, contact information for every attendee was gathered. Their telephone numbers, their email addresses, was to invite them for future actions. That was really important, and it was keys to get people, to keep them in the loop and to let them know. It was like the communication web. We had people come to community board meetings. We had people come to town hall meetings. We asked people to ask for meetings with their local politicians. We created a web of communication to get the word out via social media. We flyered, we marched, we had signs for the rezoning, equaling displacement. We had a block party, and we cornered our council member on stage, and we held him accountable for what his intentions were in the rezoning. All of the hearings that was coupled with that rezoning were also publicized, and we communicated with people to come and to get them out to those things. We participated in a nonviolent civil disobedience action where 9 of us got arrested for blocking a major artery. And at the same time, the rent laws on our rent-regulated apartments were expiring. For 30 years, tenants groups had been struggling to pass stronger rent laws. We identified the source of what was blocking those rent laws, and that was these 9 Democrats that were voting Republican. They were like fake Democrats. And despite a Democratic majority in the Assembly and a Democratic majority in the state Senate, it would pass the Assembly, but it would fail in the Senate because of these 9 Democrats that kept voting against it. So we raised awareness by collecting over 1,200 postcards and delivering them around Christmas time with you know, we got creative with Santa hats, and local media was there, and you know, they really, we got put in the papers. I mean, we got local papers involved. So the community began to read, and it was like we were saturating the community with more and more information about what was going on. We connected. We connected citywide because it wasn't just our senator. The IDC included, the Independent Democratic Conference members included senators from other boroughs. So we managed to, and together, we managed to vote them out. Now this was major. That was a major victory. That was the stick, the club that we were wielding over our Assembly and our senators' heads when we pressured them to pass these 9 rent bills. We weaponized our tenant voting power and targeted the Speaker of the Assembly and the leader of the state Senate. We door knocked every Sunday in their districts, speaking to their constituents, asking them to call their politician and putting the pressure on. We had a citywide rally at a famous church in Harlem. I think Andrea shared. We invited politicians to come. They supported us. We rallied in front of government buildings, invited the press to all of our events. It was crucial to have that media there. The groundswell began with tenant organizing, tenant associations, then getting the word out neighbor to neighbor, keeping folks in the loop via social media, letting them know about actions, rallies, and voting. Met Council volunteers would call tenants and patch through with phone technology, aiding them to call their local politicians and tell them what we wanted, whether it be with the rezoning, whether it be with the rent bills. We had volunteers come in and help with that. One of the last actions we took involved over 2,000 tenants from all over the state descending on the state capitol, unannounced, with no sound permit, and with a bullhorn, and we broke off into 15 groups apiece, and each group was assigned 1 senator and 1 assembly person. We were instructed to go in, disrupt, let them know what the platform is, and let them know that if they did not vote on these 9 rent laws, we were going to get them voted out, just like we got the IDC voted out. And so we sold those wolf tickets to the politicians, and believe me, they were shaking in their boots, because it was either to take the money, take all the money you could before you were turned out, or before you got voted out. So neighborhood groups connected with citywide groups who connected with statewide groups. And that's how we did it. It was a lot of work, but it was very rewarding. And by the way, last but not least, not only was I able to keep my apartment, the landlord had to do all the repairs building-wide and pay the tenants over $1,000 a piece. And that's the whole ball of wax right there. And you know, when we get together, we're a powerful force. We are a powerful force. Thank you.
So good. Thank you so much, Lena. Next up is Anita Long from Casa New Settlement in Southwest Bronx.
Hi. Again, I'm Anita Long with Casa, and that's part of the Housing Justice for All. Okay, I'm going to talk about the challenges that we're now going to be facing, being that rent laws has been passed on June 14, 2019. And believe it or not, it's still being described as devastating and disastrous by the landlord groups when we look in their what they put out in Twitter and what they put out in op-eds and news articles. But we as a coalition is not going to put much credence into what the landlords are saying, because we know simply that they are just in the business of trying to figure out how to make real estate investment profitable for themselves while the tenants are still struggling to make ends meet. Back in 2016, several coalitions created a banner called the No More MCI Coalition, which is the Major Capital Improvement. We had knew that the laws was getting ready to expire in 2019, and we knew that law was something that was very hard to tackle and that we cannot change it just because we want to change it. So we decided to target DHCR, which was the Division of Home and Community Renewal here in New York, because we knew that they had the power to make state policy and administrative changes. That's what we were going after, was what the administrative changes. DHCR is a state agency which was responsible for all of the landlords' MCI requests and approvals. And this is why we decided to go at that end. After several meetings and hearings from the commissioner of the DHCR and their executive team, several things became very clear to us. One, the current system couldn't be reformed regarding the MCIs. And this was the reason why the coalition, Housing Justice for All, called for the elimination of MCIs. Two, the MCI program was notoriously rife with fraud, and the state was incapable of actual oversight because they had no resources, such as they only can send out information to tenants in English. As we all know, New York is a melting pot with different languages. We couldn't even get anything written in Spanish because they didn't have the computer system in order for them to send out the information in a different language. They realized that they have to upgrade their computer system, and they didn't have no money to do it. Also, no inspectors. You only had 7 inspectors in the state of New York. So who was really watching the landlords and what they were doing and what their claim was? Three, the MCI process was unfair, and the landlords were always given every benefit of the doubt, while the burden was on tenants to provide the oversight as if they themselves were the enforcement agency. Meaning, if the landlord did an MCI and if a tenant decided to complain, they had to put in complaints through lawyers, and that process takes several years, even though the tenant is paying for it right now. So we found out that was unfair. Also, 4, according to the data submitted to the Rent Guideline Board, over the past 3 years, DHCR received an average of 1,000 MCI applications from the landlords annually, and they approved over 90% of them. Today, with the new rent laws that was passed, the coalition is now faced with a whole new set of new challenges in regards, because what we got through the new laws is we didn't get the elimination of the MCIs, but what we got was a reformed MCI. So one of the challenges, there are several challenges that this coalition is now faced with. 1, now we have to make sure that the new rent laws are enforced. 2, we have to go back and target DHCR while understanding what we are really up against, a state agency that has no resources or inspectors. 3, we have to continue the calling of elimination of MCIs. 4, we have to continue collecting data regarding MCIs under the new rules now. 5, we have to target a city agency, which is called the HPD, Housing Preservation and Development, because this agency is responsible for preserving affordable housing and protecting tenants, developing new affordable housing, and enforcing the housing maintenance control. 5, we have to also now target the housing court system alongside with the right to counsel, because the right to counsel right now is within our housing court system, and we need to be alongside them because we have a whole new set of rent laws. Now, when it came to good cause, that was another law that we did not win in the state of New York, and we're still going to push to make sure that this bill is passed, because we have to bring renters' rights to unregulated tenants, including those in smaller buildings and in manufactured home communities. In New York, the rent stabilization only applies to buildings with 6 or more units. Many smaller buildings are being bought up by large corporate landlords, and tenants who still live in them are still faced with escalated rent increases and displacement because they have no protection. The good cause eviction will bring a right to a lease renewal and limit rent increases set by the local price index. How we need to make sure that we win this good cause is, 1, we're going to continue to target our elected officials. 2, we're going to target candidates seeking placement on the upcoming election ballots. And 3, we're going to target the housing court system alongside the right to counsel to make sure these tenants are somehow protected by law. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
So now I think we have questions and answers. I mean, I think we're all just like so excited for the new organizing opportunities that have opened up and for what we have left to win. And, you know, there are still 89,000 homeless New Yorkers in our state. There are still so many tenants who don't have protections and people who are left out. So we're excited to keep winning shit.
Yay. And just a review from the last couple speakers, you know, we heard about the importance of a real estate money out of politics campaign. So exciting to see that successfully integrate with the grassroots organizing and voter integration. And then that is something that like we also relate very much to in California. The lifeblood of the Democratic Party is real estate money here. So I feel like we have a lot to learn. And then finally, the fight never stops. So thank you, Anita, for talking about what we need to pay attention to in New York, those upcoming fights. I think, you know, it's something we're understanding more and more here every time we pass a new rent control law in California. It's like, what's the enforcement? What's the implementation? You know, it's just kind of, it's landlords will never stop, so we can never stop. So just to summarize what we're hearing, and if you could please share your questions and comments in the chat box if you're available, or if you're just on the phone, you can press *6 to unmute. We did already get a couple questions in the chat box, so I think that I can just start there. And all our presenters, you can just freely figure out who wants to answer any particular question. I apologize, since I'm a California person, I don't know as much about New York exactly and who would be best to answer them, so you just jump in. So we have our first question here, which is, are you lining up tenant leaders from this growing movement to run for office at various levels of government?
So I think the short answer is yes. We are So we have statewide elections again in 2020, and then our whole city council in New York City is turning over in 2021. And especially the city of Rochester has been so gerrymandered by a Republican state senate that there's almost no real representation there for progressives. And so we are really excited for the promise of, electing out corporate Democrats and replacing them with tenant movement leaders, and working with some groups, including Local Progress, so Working Families Party, and our local DSA chapters to make that happen.
In Rochester, we have somebody that just won for city council, and she's a great supporter. She helped with some of the organizing, and so she's been Mary Lupian. So she won city council, so we're excited for that. It was our first one.
Yeah, and then the sort of instructive thing I think we should look to is the village of Ossining, which had the first rent stabilization opt-in campaign to be successful in almost 20 years, just 1 year before we changed the state law. And the way that they did that is the tenant movement in Ossining first lost their fight for rent control, then ran 2 of their members for the Ossining Town Board, and they won, and then they were able to opt into rent control. So as local elections happen across the state, I think what Liz said is completely instructive. We are going to be running candidates who will support ETPA opt-in campaigns, and if they don't do that, we hope that they will lose. And we've already had 127 local leaders sign a letter saying that, or 127 local candidates who are running with the Working Families Party say that they would support an ETPA opt-in campaign. Or who aren't running, who are seeking an endorsement from the Working Families Party. So ETPA is the acronym for rent stabilization.
Thank you. And thanks for spelling out the acronym. I know there can get a little alphabet soup over here. We have our next question from Greg, which is saying, and you might have touched on this a little bit already, but would love to discuss the NYCHA and those tenants left out of universal rent control and any potential backlash.
Hi, we're back. Hello, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Was this the NYCHA question? I think that's what we heard as we were losing.
I'll repeat the question. It's would love to discuss NYCHA and those tenants left out of universal rent control and any potential backlash.
Yeah, I can answer the first, and then someone else can talk about sort of landlord backlash. I think the next place that we need to go, and we're having a sort of retreat with all of our leaders this weekend, is revenue to our state public housing, our city and state public housing agencies, including NYCHA, which is our New York City Public Housing Authority, and also revenue to HCR, like Anita was talking about, to actually make sure the laws are enforced in a tenant-friendly way. Our governor is going to try and kill these wins with austerity and through defunding the public housing authorities and the agencies that need to enforce them. So we need to fight back against that. About landlord backlash?
The landlords have been threatening, through the media and social media and the local media channels that the buildings or what they own is going to now deteriorate, cannot build or whatever, or fix anything. But that's why we need to now, like I said, get into the court systems, get into the different state agency and city agencies to make sure that this doesn't happen. And also everyone has to realize that, let's say the MCI law has been in existence since 1974, and which was always in landlords' favor as opposed to tenants. And this was a tool that the landlord had for all these years. And to me, it would look like all of their buildings or property would be in pristine conditions if they had it this long and you don't have to use that tool to threaten us with, because you lost it now. I think it's unfair, and I don't think that they should be allowed to sit back and allow their property to deteriorate,
Yeah. It will require organizing to enforce.
Yes.
With the Rent Guidelines Board, when our Rent Guidelines Board voted for an increase in the rents for this year, and 1.5 for a 1-year lease and 2.5 for a 2-year lease. So, I think that was as a direct result of our winning the rent reform victory. We should have gotten a 0% increase.
Great. Anyone else on this question? All right. So there's another one from Isabel. How or what parts of this work was done in a C3? That's a particular nonprofit status. For those of you who don't know, that doesn't allow you to do political candidate work. You can do political issue work, but anyway, so for the non-C3 work, like targeting candidates or sitting representatives and advocating for new leadership, how do you get tenant rights to be as powerful as party affiliation and endorsements?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So like I said, and if you're having trouble hearing, just type or shout. We are a coalition of about 70 organizations across the state, and I would say that the vast majority of our participants are C3 organizations, or they are sort of non-incorporated grassroots volunteer tenant organizations that are renters coming together to fight for their rights, irrespective of a sort of corporate nonprofit structure. So it's a little hard, right? C3 organizations can do issue-based work, but they can't do direct political work like lobbying. And C4 organizations can do some more of that stuff, but there's it can be harder to raise money for C4 type organizing. That is one of the reasons why it was so important for us to do this work in coalition. So we didn't do this work as RENA and CASA and Met Council on Housing. We did this work as Housing Justice for All and as the Upstate Downstate Housing Alliance, which is a member organization that represents all of us, but the coalition really gave a lot of our organizations the protection that they need to the sort of like legal protection that they need to do the work. And then we had other sort of allied groups in the coalition, like our New York State Working Families Party, like our DSA chapters, and like some of the other nonprofits who aren't on this call actually incorporated as C4 organizations who can do that type of sort of endorsements and direct political work. So they were really at the table, and we were sort of pushing them to put tenants' rights front and center to the more electoral work that they were doing, as well as sort of they were sort of creating opportunities for us to do more sort of direct or indirect lobbying and political work. But the vast majority of the work that we did was truly like tenant organizing in neighborhoods and educating people on their rights, educating people about the issue that we were facing and who was opposed to it. And that sort of tenant education work is very, is C3 friendly and can inspire a lot of people to take action one way or another. And that was our experience. And, we're happy to talk more about the sort of like tricky legal structures offline, because it's not necessarily that fun. But it really is important.
Thank you. So we have a next, oh, I'm sorry, did you want to add?
Sia mentioned that the tenant organizing was one of the biggest things that they did, but you know, when you are going into neighborhoods where you have to be culturally sensitive, block parties are very effective. Block parties to get the word out, where there's food and there's music and there's cultural sensitivity there.
Great. Thank you. So the next one we have particularly for Liz. Liz, you talked about statewide assemblies. Why were these assemblies important for building alignment and unity between groups all over the state?
I think they're really good because it gave, for us, it gave an opportunity to map. It was an opportunity to build and where we needed to work and where we needed to move next. So that was the good point of it, because it allowed us to have targets locally, and from that local targeting, where we went into like our assembly and our Senate's office and talked to them, and some of them, you know, kind of switched over and got on board. And it also gave us an opportunity to reach out to folks that weren't necessarily at the assembly, but targets who communities we needed to reach out to, like Buffalo and Syracuse, who wasn't on board at first, but then it gave us an opportunity to build bigger in the folks at Akron. So the assembly was sort of like a planning point for the movement, a planning point for building and mapping out and moving towards our target. So that was a good opportunity for us.
Great, thank you, Liz. And then we have one particularly for Lena. You talked about the groundswell starting with local tenant organizing. What opportunities are there for organizing new groups to build the long-term power of renters in New York State? And what support is needed? What will it take?
What opportunities with new tenants? Oh, well, RENA has a tenant clinic, and as tenants have problems with their landlords, as those problems pop up and people come into the rent clinic from different buildings, that's where we offer the help to organize a tenant association in that person's building. And that works because you know, it helps the individual to not be the one to bring the tenant association together, right? We flyer under people's doors, we make the date, we go in, we present ourselves as from that nonprofit organization, RENA, and offer to hold their hands for the first couple of meetings, and to come in and explain things, you know, later on if they need us to come back. But, you know, what was the second part of that question?
Second part was what support is needed and what will it take? What will it take to get that support?
Well, you know, I think that it takes, you know, when somebody like myself, right? I came in with a problem with my landlord who wanted to evict me eventually, not recognizing my succession rights, not recognizing my tenancy. And an agency helps you, like you form a bond with those people. Like you're grateful, like somebody just pulled you out from a moving, you know, from getting hit by a bus. You know, you go back and you give back to that agency. That's how RENA builds its power, and that's how a lot of these agencies are building power. When you help somebody, they come back and they want to give back.
Can I just say too,
Yeah.
this is Liz from Rochester, Citywide Tenant Union. One of the things that always helped us build was just getting out to the community, just like you said earlier, and talking to tenants, letting them know that they have their rights, and supporting them to enforce their rights, and uniting them, like getting them to organize within the building. I think we also had partnerships with Citizen Action and some other local groups, and Vocal New York, and they did a lot of things with us to bring in more tenants, because they're both working on housing issues too, but not at the scale that we are. But it kind of bring a unity to what we do, and they're also helping. We built in with our coalition with the homeless union, because we also deal with homelessness, because homelessness is the first thing that happens with a lot of people in the community when they are evicted. So we kind of supported each other through the process, and we're building that way. And we want to be more proactive to get tenants involved prior to being evicted. So we have a campaign that we're just going out to the unregulated buildings and talking to tenants, getting them involved, letting them know, a lot of them have seen a lot of the footage that had happened, news media that had happened with 447 Thurston Road, and they say, hey, that's you. And so then we have a name recognition in the community. So people know when we say Citywide Tenant Union, they know kind of what we stand for. And where, the other piece to that question was, how do we need support? I think as we build, what we're doing, giving people education, building educational classes, educational training such as computer literacy and different things like that, then we can grow as an organization. So we're a non-for-profit, so we don't have the protection of the the 501c3. So, but that's my thoughts in a nutshell.
I just wanted to add that, when people come in, they give Rena their address, and whenever Rena has a function that they want people to go to, they do a mass mailing, and that's they make phone calls, they do mass mailings. There's that web of communication. So somebody from upstate can say, well, we're going to Albany and let's do this together. There, the web begins to light up, and everybody, disseminates the information to their smaller groups, and those smaller groups to the smaller groups, until you get to the individuals. It's a web of, it's a communication web.
And I think kind of following up on this question to dig a little bit more deeper and more specific is how part of the new law allows cities to implement rent control, and maybe, are those already presenting themselves as opportunities to organize in smaller cities? And if you guys want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I can start, and then Liz should jump in, but I know we have already started ETPA opt-in campaigns in Beacon, Newburgh, Kingston, Rochester, and hopefully soon in Buffalo and Syracuse and Hudson and Poughkeepsie. So there is definitely a lot of interest. The first step is that tenants have to demand that the city council study the city council sort of study that local housing market and declare a housing emergency. And so think every place in New York State is in a housing emergency. So we're starting that place in numerous in that process in numerous places, and hoping that it can really transform organizing and give people the sort of like short-term win that they need to fight for in order to really like inspire action in local places. And we're hoping that some of the eviction protections that we won that aren't rent control will give that are a step in the right direction, will give tenants the sort of protections they need to take action without that sort of fear of retaliation, so that we can win ETPA opt-ins. And I know the Citywide Tenant Union in Rochester is starting some of that work, and they're already starting some of that work in the Hudson Valley as well.
One of the things that we're pushing for is for our city council to do a vacancy study, just to see if we meet the criteria. Through the vacancy study, we have to be 5%, a 5% vacancy rate. So we're pushing our city council to do that. So that's where we are right now. And we're just talking to members, and we wanted to, we're trying to set up an educational opportunity with Law New York, going to city council, so we can do an education about the laws and how it affect our community.
That's great, thank you. I just want to make sure we open it up to folks who are on the phone who might have a question. Just a reminder, if you are muted, you can press *6 on the phone to unmute yourself and ask a question. So we're gonna wait like 10 seconds to see if we hear from anybody. *6 to unmute. Okay. There's a couple more coming in here. Can you clarify what the vacancy study's purpose is, specifically about what the 5% benchmark means? Okay, yeah, it's a follow-up. And I think that's for, was that for Liz?
Okay, hi. So we started to answer. You can opt into rent control. Or sort of rent control is an opt-in legislation, so it's passed at the state level, but local places, their mayor or their city council has to opt in, and you are eligible if there is a vacancy rate of 5% or less on the housing stock which is covered, which is apartment buildings with more than 6 units. So one thing that landlords often claim is that, upstate New York there's a sort of divestment crisis. There's a lot of boarded up apartment buildings, or sort of vacant but uninhabitable housing stock. And so they say that rent control will make it worse. And that there's actually, the problem is that there is too much available housing, not too little. And that rent control won't sort of address that problem. We know that, the study should really only study habitable housing. It's not like people are going to move into a building that is clearly unsafe to live in. And so one place where landlords always try and sort of make rent control disappear is through like messing with the study. And we're expecting them to try and do that in the different places, and messing with the sort of supposed vacancy rate. It's very political.
And then I think this is probably our last question here. Should start wrapping up, but seems important for the people who were arrested. What was their status? Were charges dropped? How was bail handled?
So people were given something called an adjournment in contemplation. People were charged with disorderly conduct, except for, it was actually a really dramatic nonviolent civil disobedience where the sort of sergeant at arms and the sort of security guards and police officers who are charged with this, I don't know, I don't want to use the word protecting, who are charged with keeping people out of the state assembly, were really escalated the situation, and the civil disobedience turned a lot more risky as a result of the escalation that came from the police. All that being, so it was a dramatic and scary day that I have a lot of lessons from. I would be happy to talk to organizers about who want to do nonviolent civil disobedience in more detail. All that being said, what we basically did is we ran background checks with the people who wanted to risk arrest beforehand to make sure that that they were aware of whatever was in their background, to make sure that if that came up and it put them at more risk for different charges, that was a decision that people were going into with sort of open eyes and clarity about what they were potentially risking. We recruited pro bono attorneys, civil defense or criminal defense attorneys to represent everybody who was taking this step. We brought in trainers who did trainings on the role of nonviolent civil disobedience throughout, all U.S. protest movements, people who had, from civil rights to now, people who had been arrested at Stone Mountain in Georgia, to doing arrests at the Poor People's Campaign in Albany. So people were sort of really trained and prepped on the role that civil disobedience plays in winning social change, what to do, what not to do, why we do it, why it's important to take this step. We did it as part of an escalation. So it wasn't like the first thing that we did. We did it after we had already made sure that we had asked in nicer ways many times. And so ultimately people felt prepared and safe, and people had lawyers, and people were charged with disorderly conduct, which is a misdemeanor. And their charges were dropped with something called an adjournment in contemplation of dismissal, which means that if you wait for 6 months, the charges are sealed, and they're there, but they're sealed, so they won't show up in your record, and they are dismissed. So everyone who took civil disobedience arrest with us has that on their record, and it was definitely a powerful learning experience for people who did it, and I think people would be willing to do it again. Lena's nodding off camera. And we'd be happy to talk more about it. It was important. It was important for folks to take that step, and we actually did it twice during the campaign, or 3 times maybe during the campaign.
Didn't we tell them that we were going to have?
Yes, so we did this in the Capitol building, which has its own police force, which is more used to dealing with protesters than, let's say, if we dealt with the NYPD, the New York City Police, and we talked to them in advance for this purpose, mainly because we were getting so many people arrested, we knew that they need extra officers, as well as they might not, because of the politics of New York State and what goes on in the Capitol building, that they might not arrest us unless we actually told them what was happening. And so this is sort of based on what happens in your various state houses or in the place where you're planning an arrest. And as Tia said, we've done this multiple times we did it at least twice in this campaign, and a lot of people had gotten arrested during past grant law years. And so it was something that we were able to really talk with our members about, and people felt really good when they were doing it, and we made sure that the actions that they were doing during the actual arrest portion were as powerful as possible with a lot of supporters. So we had 60 plus people get arrested with us. There were 600 people or so in the Capitol building that day, cheering, chanting, screaming, singing. And then we have a very charismatic public advocate who was just elected as part of the tenants movement. He used to run a tenants organization, and he got arrested with us to make sure we got that extra publicity and that extra notoriety.
Nice. Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we should start to wrap up, and I just want to review some key lessons that we heard during the call today, and thank this powerful coalition, the Upstate Downstate Coalition, for all of their work really going on all cylinders and all fronts of the struggle for years, and congratulations for this win, and I think other wins to come. A few elements that seemed really important that I'll just summarize here, as well as the deep, organizing and policy work that has been happening for decades in New York City's, expanding that through assemblies across the state to continue to build the coalition relationships and trust. One thing that seemed to make it a bit clearer what your timeline would be, and something I know we don't necessarily have in California, which is I have a question like, how do you decide when you're going to do this? Well, the rent laws were expiring, and so that gave it a clear timeline. The need to build out the political context, was really important. I think we felt that too around electing, a big New York City landlord, like really galvanizes people. It's galvanized more people across the country too. But it was really felt that the struggle couldn't just be about New York City and needed a statewide movement, and people really showed up for that and saw that connection between local organizing from every level, like in buildings and neighborhoods, regional, citywide to statewide. And then finally really digging into a narrative, building that narrative of whose side are you on? Is it big real estate or renters? And using that in an electoral strategy as well as an organizing strategy. And then also that, again, really amazing, strong coalition. Would love to dig into how you do that and coalition dynamics and get through all of that stuff. But the multilingual, multiracial, multicultural movement, and was really part of a broader movement ecosystem. And something I just want to correct a mistake I made earlier. I will apologize. It's my non-New Yorkness. That folks with the Upstate Downstate Alliance are from a bunch of different networks and different groups, and it was just a couple of those groups that are a part of Homes for All. And so we thank you for being on this Homes for All call and helping to allow others to learn from your experience, and for being available for the future. So we have, let's see, additional contact information. HousingJusticeForAll.org is the Upstate Downstate Coalition. If you all are willing to put direct contact information in the chat box, you can feel free to do that. And then also homesforall.org, that's us, that's me, that's Malcolm. And info@homesforall.org is how you can get in touch with us as well. So that's a wrap. We made it on time. Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Amy.